ripped it into pieces and let it fall on the side of the road. Now, you would rightly be enraged. And what if I just responded, that wasn't a picture of a jaguar. That was just a black smudge on a white piece of paper. Well, you would probably respond by saying, what are you talking about? The jaguar was already there. We just couldn't see him yet. That's what I mean when I say that from the earliest stages of development, the unborn child is already a distinct, living, and whole human being who is already there, even if we can't see him yet. So that's our case from science. Our case from philosophy is as follows. Philosophically, there is no essential difference between the embryonic human being that you once were and the adult that you are today that would justify killing you at that earlier stage. Now, that's not to say that there aren't differences between the embryonic human being you were in the womb and the adult that you are today. There are differences, but none of them are essential differences to your humanity. So let's go over the main differences. I believe there are 4. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Think of the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D. Hard to think of in Southern California, but we'll work with it. Firstly, size. Yes, it's true, folks. The unborn child is much smaller than the newborn child, just like the newborn child is smaller than the toddler. But if size is a morally relevant factor in the abortion debate, then we would run into some philosophical problems. I'm 6'3" and weigh 200 pounds. I'm larger than most of you in this room tonight. But who of us would argue that I'm more human merely because I'm larger? Men are generally larger than women. We can see where that goes. No one likes that. L, level of development. Yes, it's true. The unborn child is less developed than the newborn child. Just like the newborn child is less developed than the toddler is less developed than the teenager. So if level of development is a morally relevant factor, I would be forced to concede that my parents are more human than I am and that my grandparents are more human than my parents because one is more developed than the other. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? So clearly level of development is not morally relevant in the abortion debate. Size, level of development, environment, where one is located. If environment is a morally relevant factor in the abortion debate, then when you came from the foyer into this room tonight, did you stop being human because you changed locations? When I roll over in bed, do I stop being human? Frank Beckwith, Christian apologist and author, says that where one is has no bearing on who one is. So how does an 8-inch journey down the birth canal change the unborn child from something that is unwanted and that we can legally kill to something that we should value and protect by law? Clearly, where one is located is not morally relevant to the abortion debate. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Yes, it's true. The unborn child is very dependent on the mother for sustained life, huh? Without the mother, in the earlier stages of the pregnancy, the unborn child cannot survive without the mother's sustenance. But if level of development, if degree of dependency is morally relevant to the abortion debate, then we would be forced to concede that everyone dependent on heart pacemakers, insulin, life support, are all non-humans, because they are dependent on something without which they cannot continue to live. And even pro-choice advocates won't like where that reasoning goes. So the 4 differences between the embryonic human being that you once were and the adult that you are today is size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency, and none of them are philosophically relevant or morally relevant to the abortion debate. So that's our case from science and from philosophy, and once you understand that case, you can make it in 2 minutes or less, like this. Scientifically, pro-life advocates argue that from the earliest stages of development, the unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. Philosophically, we argue that there is no essential difference, no significant difference between the embryonic human being that you once were and the adult that you are today that would justify killing you at that earlier stage. Differences in size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying that you had no right to life then in your mother's womb, but you do now. So if we want to equip ourselves to engage, we need to clarify the nature of moral reasoning. We need to clarify that we are making objective moral statements about the nature of reality. Secondly, we have to clarify the one and only question that matters in the abortion debate. What is the unborn? And thirdly, we have to clarify the case for life. We need to be able to make a persuasive and gracious case for life. So if we want to empower the next generation to abolish abortion, as I know you all do, then we have to engage. Surrender is not an option. We have to equip ourselves to engage by doing the three things I just said. And thirdly, we have to challenge ourselves to step up and make painful sacrifices for the pro-life movement. My friend, mentor, and colleague, Greg Cunningham, says that there are more people working full-time to kill babies than there are working full-time to save babies. That's because killing babies is very profitable, while saving babies is very costly. So costly that large numbers of people who say they oppose abortion aren't lifting a finger to stop the killing. And those that do lift a finger do just enough to solve the conscience, but not enough to stop the killing. So that leads us to this question. What is our duty to the unborn? What is your duty to the preborn? I believe that our duty to the preborn is to love our unborn neighbors and his or her mother. But this, of course, begs the question, is the unborn our neighbor? Should we view the unborn as our neighbor? And I believe that the case for life that I presented tonight proves that the unborn is a distinct, living, and whole human being, and should therefore be granted the same value that Jesus put on loving our neighbors. But sometimes it's costly to love our neighbors, huh? Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices. And I believe the parable of the Good Samaritan is one of the best examples of this. You're all familiar with it, but I'll retell it anyways. A man's traveling on the road, he gets mugged, he gets beat up, he gets robbed, he gets left for dead. As he's sitting there bleeding out, a Levite and a priest walk by him. Scripture says that they walked by on the other side to avoid him. Now, I think it's safe to say that the Levite and the priest, being religious men, had a functioning moral conscience. I think it's safe to say that the Levite and the priest were probably opposed to street mugging. But when they were confronted with it, what did they do about it? We know they did nothing. I think it's safe to say that the Levite and the priest, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, felt compassion for the bleeding victim. Oh, that's really a bummer. He shouldn't have got beaten up. I wouldn't have done that. I wish it hadn't happened. But they didn't show compassion to the bleeding victim. It was the Good Samaritan, the bleeding victim's natural enemy, who not only felt compassion, but showed compassion to the bleeding victim. He made sacrifices to love his neighbor, didn't he? The story tells us that he bandaged the man's wounds, that he took him to an inn, that he told the innkeeper, hey, nurse this man back to health. Do whatever he needs. And when I come back, if any other costs accumulated, I'll pay for those too. The Good Samaritan made painful sacrifices of his time and his money to do what? To love his neighbor well, to love his neighbor lavishly. Are we willing to love our unborn neighbors in the same way? Many of you have seen the film Schindler's List. And for those of you who have, many of you are familiar with one of the final scenes. The final scene that Oskar Schindler appears in. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I will tell you what happens. Oskar Schindler is standing surrounded by 1,100 Jews. The war has just ended, and these 1,100 Jews owe Oskar Schindler their very lives. Oskar Schindler was a very rich and successful businessman in Germany, part of the Nazi Party. But he used almost all of his money to buy Jews off the Nazi death camp lists and employ them in his factory to save their lives. He saved 1,100 Jews from destruction by buying them with his very money, by making financial sacrifices to love his Jewish neighbors. And in this final scene, when he's surrounded by people who owe him their very lives, he looks at his friend, who's the leader of the Jews, and he says, I could have saved one more. And he starts weeping, and he looks at his car and says, this car, why did I keep my car? 10 more, I could have saved 10 more. Why did I keep the car? And he looks at his badge, his Nazi badge on his coat, and he tears it off and goes, this is gold. 2 more, at least 1 more. Why did I keep this? And he begins to weep, and he tells his friend, I could have saved more, I could have done more. He says, you don't know how much money I blew away, how much money I wasted. I could have done so much more. And his friend embraces him, and all the Jews come and embrace him and hug him. And here's a man who went to the wall to love his neighbor, who gave away everything he had and saved generations of people because of his sacrifices for his Jewish neighbors. And so I want to ask you the question tonight. Do we take our Holocaust in 2014 as seriously as Oskar Schindler took his? Because if we do, if we truly do, then there is something that we can do tonight to help stop the killing, to empower the next generation to abolish abortion. We can sacrificially and lavishly love our unborn neighbors through the Women's Pregnancy Care Clinic. I'm going to ask the table hosts to distribute the donation envelopes at your table to each member sitting at each table. And as you're distributing those, and as those are going around to each member at each table, I want to ask you for 2 things tonight. Just 2 in light of our genocide, in light of the amount of babies that are dying because of legalized abortion. Firstly, I want to ask you to make a sacrificial gift. To make a gift that really hurts. To sacrificially love your unborn neighbors through a one-time gift that really hits the pocketbook. And if you're wondering what a sacrificial gift looks like, whatever number you're thinking, just double it and see if that hurts. Your one-time sacrificial gift tonight will help fund the vision that Jeanette talked about for the new things that they want to implement in 2015. Abstinence, post-abortion healing ministries, more educational projects in the Whittier and Pasadena area to educate people and empower the next generation to abolish abortion. All that Jeanette talked about, your one-time sacrificial gift, will go towards that. And what a vision to contribute to. And I want you to consider this. I want you to consider that it costs roughly $1,200 to save 1 baby from abortion. It costs roughly $1,200 to save 1 baby from abortion. That includes the appointments, the follow-up appointments, the online advertising, the ultrasound, all that goes into everything that the staff do at Women's Pregnancy Care Clinic. It ends up averaging around $1,200 to save 1 baby from abortion. So if that helps you give an idea of how much you want to give, then please do. So that's the first thing I want to ask from you tonight, is to sacrificially and lavishly love your unborn neighbors by making a one-time gift that really hits the pocketbook. And secondly, I want you to commit to a monthly amount. Now, many of you are already supporting Women's Pregnancy Care Clinic on a monthly basis, and I want to say thank you. I want to say God bless you. Thank you for supporting Women's Pregnancy Care Clinic on a monthly basis. You know what your monthly donations do? They keep the lights on. They keep the doors open. They keep them being able to stay open longer. And the more that they're open and the longer that they're open, the more women they can serve and the more lives they can save. They can't function without the normal influx of donation. They need your month-to-month support. So I want you to also consider supporting Women's Pregnancy Care Clinic on a monthly basis. Something practical, something that's easy to do that really helps save babies. Both gifts are vital to Women's Pregnancy Care Clinic. They need both. They need your lavish, sacrificial one-time gift and your monthly. So thank you for coming here tonight. Thank you for taking this seriously and being willing to sacrifice and invest in the next generation and invest in this amazing ministry. Please join me in sacrificially loving our unborn neighbors by taking the next few minutes to fill out your donation cards.